Virginia's newly sworn in Governor Glenn Youngkin hitting the ground running, and those he is hitting are hitting back. He's getting a huge heaping of backlash for his mask mandate ban. Youngkin is allowing students to decide whether to wear a mask in their classes despite the massive spread of COVID in the Old Dominion. But even getting more attention, his tip line to report teachers in schools discussing critical race theory and academic theory focusing on the role of institutional racism. We're back with Dr. Carter right now, Dr. Niambi Carter. And Dr. Carter, you know the old saying, if you build it, they will come. In Virginia, Youngkin believed that if he put it in an executive order, they would follow. The problem is half the state voted for him, the other half didn't, Northern Virginia. And there's two problems with that. Most of the people live in Northern Virginia, and 60% of the money from the state that the state spends comes from Northern Virginia. So can he get anything done? And he also has a divided Congress or divided state house.
I mean, time will tell. I mean, people were very much persuaded by his message on education. In fact, even in those places in Northern Virginia, we saw them trend more Republican during this election than we'd seen before. So, it's hard to say what he'll be successful at. I do think, though, he's creating an environment that is unnecessarily combative. I mean, why fight parents about something like a mask mandate? Well, it plays well in an election, but it's hard to see how that works out when we're still in the middle of a public health emergency and people have to think about sending their kids to school each day without the most basic protections.
We have a state in Virginia, I live in Virginia, that is growing more multicultural by the day, especially Northern Virginia. We talk about the largest counties in Virginia are multicultural, but the largest population that is growing is Middle East Asian versus Black and versus Hispanic, but it is becoming more and more diverse. And he sets up a tip line saying that if you know something happening in the schools about critical race theory, call us. That is turned into a joke line with people calling in, reporting things like Bigfoot and other things like that. Is the Youngkin welcome mat wearing thin already?
Well, look, I mean, I think the most dangerous part about that tip line is it's critical race theory and anything that is related to it. So basically, anything that primarily whites find objectionable, they can call and report because that line was not made for people that look like you or I, right? That line was made for white parents and their children who get lessons they don't like. And the truth is, there's a lot about American history that is uncomfortable, quite frankly, and that is unsettling, and people don't want to talk about it. And that's what this tip line was for. So he should have expected counter protests because that tip line is really trying to put a control on our education, trying to censor teachers. And trying to censor the kinds of materials that students get to learn. And as you point out, because Virginia is very multicultural, what he's saying is that the histories of all of these other kinds of people don't matter, that they're not important, that they're not part of the curriculum, or they shouldn't be part of the curriculum because they don't square with this narrative that, America was always this great nation that never had any problems, that never harmed anybody, that never did anything wrong. And you and I both know that that's not true. So he should have expected this to happen. And this is one of the ways that people protest. They call and make, you know, a joke out of this thing, which is essentially not serious as an exercise because no one is teaching critical race theory to school children.
Dr. Carter, what is serious, though, is the change in America and the fact that as minorities gain more and more power, they demand more things in the way of education. The statute of Robert E. Lee coming down in Richmond, Virginia, was a shot across the bow to really what was the old Confederacy. We forget that it was the capital of the Confederacy, Richmond, Virginia. And now people are challenging things like how many slaves did George Washington have? Was Thomas Jefferson really a good man or a bad man? How do you address the issues of a racially diverse America and the problems that it took to get here without feeling among white Americans that you're putting down everything that is white?
Well, look, it's not about putting it down, it's about telling the truth, right? I mean, we can talk about, these great institutions that some of these men created and also understand that they were slave owners. And that in and of itself is not a good thing. I don't care if it was legal at the time. I think what happens is that people feel guilty and it's like, why are you feeling guilty? This just is. I don't feel guilty about everything or every heinous act that some Black person may have committed because I didn't do it. And I recognize the full humanity of Black people, which means that there are good people, there are not so good people. And that has nothing to do with race. That's just people. And I think if people had the same attitude about the founders, they are not perfect people. The truth is multivalent, right? It is both true that these men wrote these great documents and they owned other people in bondage. That both of those things can be true. And it doesn't mean that everything that, Europeans contributed was tainted, but it also doesn't mean that everything that Europeans contributed was great. The Trail of Tears is a blight on this nation. Japanese internment is a blight on this nation. That is something that we have to reckon with. The only way we can get past things, though, is to face them head on and repair the damage. You don't get to, live in peace and tranquility if you're not willing to admit all of the sort of ugliness that happened before. And I think too often we want to get to the peace and tranquility, but we don't want to go through the muck and the mire. We don't want to go through the dirt of it all. And there's a lot of hurt and there's a lot of pain in that. And it's not just white feelings that matter here, right? And I think that's something we have to remember too. White feelings are not the only feelings that matter.
Dr. Carter, which Virginia is it? Is it the Virginia that elected Doug Wilder, the first African-American governor since Reconstruction? Was it the Virginia that actually put Barack Obama over the edge, not once, but twice? Or is it the state that elected Glenn Youngkin? Which Virginia are we seeing?
I think it's a both and proposition, right? But all of those things happen, but we know that they happen in a very unique context. And I will say this, one of the things that we notice sometimes is that when there is sort of one party in power, there's a backlash against that party. And that leads to sort of this changing of parties in power. And so Virginia did elect Doug Wilder. They have also not elected another Black governor since. Virginia also did elect a Barack Obama and help Joe Biden get into office. It's also the case that they picked a Republican governor who has a very sort of, I would say, hard right or trending hard right kind of stance on things like
Right.
education and COVID. And that was appealing to the majority of voters of that state as well. So maybe how people select on the state level is not
Right.
the same way that they select on the national level. Clearly that is the case in the state of Virginia. And I think that Virginia is a complicated state because everything in Northern Virginia is not the
Yeah,
same as
you
what's happening in Emporia and Suffolk and all those other smaller towns on the southern part of the state, which is a very different place in Northern Virginia.
you nailed it in 2 words. It's complicated. Dr. Niambi Carter, I thank you for being with us.